Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 228. Today I am talking with the author of The Learning Game, Ana Lorena Fábrega, and we have a great conversation today all about creativity, about challenging our kids to think outside the box, and ultimately why homeschooling is a great vehicle to do that. You're going to love this episode. I can't wait to share it with you. Before we get started, though, a special shout out to CTC Math. Thank you, as always, for being our season-long sponsor. We appreciate you, and I know I and my kids love using CTC in our homeschool. I also want to take just a minute to let you know about a great offer from a sponsor. You're going to love this one, so stick around, and we'll get on with the episode in just a minute. Okay, are you looking for something to kind of shake up what you're doing for language arts? Night Zookeeper just might be the answer for you. We have used Night Zookeeper in the past, but we're back in it this year with my youngest, Isaac. He is just about to start jumping in again, and I'm excited to be able to share on social media some of the things that he's doing with it. But Night Zookeeper is a game-changing language arts program that takes the stress out of teaching because it's fun, it's engaging. Your kiddo is going to love it because it's different than other things. It teaches your child spelling, grammar, punctuation, vocabulary, reading, and writing through a pre-planned language arts curriculum that your kiddo can use independently. I love this because a program like Night Zookeeper frees me up to do one-on-one help with another kiddo while one is doing this program independently. And then, so when Isaac's doing this, he can jump in, he can learn, he can write, he can engage with the word games and the interactive video lessons and the cool, fun, inspiring writing prompts. And then, if he gets stuck or he wants to share something with me, he can pause and come get me and I can go help him, but I don't have to sit there and do it all from start to finish. And let me tell you, having some of those kinds of programs in your back pocket when you are a crazy busy mom of gifted, twice exceptional, and otherwise neurodivergent kiddos is a game changer because you can take it on the go, you can bring your tablet with you, your kiddos can access it from the computer in the family room or the laptop on the go or their Chromebook or whatever. And, okay, so here's something super cool. Your kiddo is going to get written feedback on their writing from real tutors. So if they need support or they need to be working on something or they need to add some more describing words or they're messing up their punctuation, you don't have to be the bad guy. I know I'm the bad guy often in my house when I'm trying to get my kids to understand a certain concept. And here you have real tutors at your disposal helping you by assessing and taking a look at your kiddos' writing and giving them feedback. Thousands and thousands of homeschool parents have found success using Night Zookeeper to transform their children's attitude towards language art and writing in particular, and you're going to love it. It's perfect for ages 6 to 12. If you've got an advanced kiddo, you could start them earlier on it. If you've got a kiddo who needs a little bit more support with their reading, writing, vocabulary, or other language arts skills, you can let them jump back into it or stick with it a little bit longer. However you need to use the program, you've got this. Okay, so if you're ready to say goodbye to the stress of teaching language arts, give Night Zookeeper a try. Just head on over to rll.bz/nightzookeeper, rll.bz/nightzookeeper, all lowercase letters, and you can get a 7-day free trial and 50% off an annual subscription. You cannot beat that. If you can't remember that link, rll.bz/nightzookeeper, you can also head over to the show notes for this episode and find the link there. All right, are you ready? Let's get on with today's episode. I am so thrilled to be here with a guest. Actually, I followed for a long time on Instagram and around town. Some of you might remember as you're listening, a couple years ago, we had a sponsor, Synthesis, for a while. And so I've known about this next guest for a while since my days working with synthesis, and it's been really fun watching her and her new book launch. So I can't wait to introduce you to her. So welcome, Ana Lorena Fábrega, to the podcast. I'm so excited that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk today.
Yeah, I've been thinking for years now, actually, that we would get along really well and we'd have a lot
Mhm.
to talk about. So
Mhm.
this is super fun for me to have you on here. Why don't you take a quick minute and just introduce yourself to listeners and let them know who you are and a little bit about you.
Yeah. So, Anna, I'm originally from Panama, but I moved around a lot as a kid growing up. So, by the time I was 14, I had attended 10 different schools in 7 different countries around the world. And so, when it comes to education, I like to say that I've been around the block a few times, as a student. And I picked up on a few things that I liked about the system and the things that I had to do in order to navigate, all the different academic expectations and social expectations and being the new girl over and over again. But I believe that all that sort of became a springboard for my desire to then work with kids and get involved in education. So I then went on and became a teacher. So I studied childhood education and special education at NYU. I student taught there, and then I taught in New York, Boston, and Panama in elementary school level. And I really loved it. I loved working with kids. That's sort of my passion. I had so much to learn from them. And in addition to sort of like doing the teaching, but I started to notice several inconsistencies within the system. And it got to a point where I felt like we were not really spending kids' time the best way possible. And many kids were falling through the cracks. And it just felt like there were so many little things within the system. And we can talk about it at some point in this conversation that sort of pushed me outside of the classroom and wanting to explore learning activities or learning experiences outside the school system. So I started to explore the alternative education world. It turns out that there are a lot of alternatives in the homeschooling world and online education. And so I started to write sort of about my experience in the classroom as a teacher, as a student, now as a parent. And although all that writing for the past few years turned into my first book, The Learning Game. And yeah, so I'm excited to chat about everything education related.
So fun. Your background is so fascinating. And it's interesting how I was actually just having this conversation with my husband the other day. My husband is a teacher. He still
Mhm.
teaches and he's a reading specialist and actually has just started the last 2 years working with at-risk high schoolers. And the conversation that we were having was actually about homeschooling because I was telling him some of the stuff that I was researching for my book. And the number of educators and former educators who embrace an alternative lifestyle of education for their own kids is really quite staggering and
Mhm.
quite indicative of the problems with the system, if you think about it. Wouldn't you
Mhm.
say?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that every educator goes in there for the right reasons. We all want to work, but we quickly realize that in our heart, we want to do the right thing and the things that we know, but there's just so many things, right, that we have to adhere to and standards and curriculums and this and that and homework and tests and that it's out of our control and it sort of like spins out of control and yeah, it pushes a lot of educators outside of the system or they start to seek for alternatives, like you very well said.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so interesting. I ran across an article years ago. We'll link to it in the show notes about educators kind of being the indicator species. Different biospheres and ecosystems have identifying indicator species that let you know the health of an environment, and that educators are kind of the indicator species for education. And when you see them leaving in droves or creating their own alternative methods of education for their own kids or for others, because my gosh, the rise of educational entrepreneurs has been incredible over the last several years. Then you really need to take a look at
Mhm.
what is going on. But that honestly could be a whole other conversation. And as listeners here are people who have already embraced that alternative lifestyle, let's talk about that. What
Mhm.
actually is best for kids? Like, why isn't what they're doing as good for kids as we know it can be?
Mhm.
And what is the right thing to do for
Yeah.
kids?
Yeah, so it's so interesting because something that you quickly notice when you just sit down and observe any kid, any age, but especially the little ones, is that they are born with this natural instinct and desire to learn. Like it's something that we don't need to teach them how to learn, right? They're born with this capacity. They're also born with the capacity to think for themselves. That's why they're constantly asking questions and, they stick to something and they're there until they break it or until they try to figure it out. And at the beginning, they don't give up, right? And they don't have this like notion of, oh, what happens if I fail? What happens if I take this risk? They just go for it, right? And so again, it's this natural instinct that we're all born with. What happens is that they suddenly, they get older and we suddenly put them into this restrictive, confined environments where we suddenly like tell them something that again comes naturally to them. We tell them what they need to learn. They no longer have a choice over that. They no longer have a choice of, the way that they get to learn about this, how long they get to spend on something that interests them, or, what topic to pick or how to show you what they've learned, right? They no longer, like kids are all very different. We're all very different, right? And they suddenly have like this one way that we assess them, that we teach them, that we do everything. And so this thing that again comes naturally suddenly becomes enforced. Well, no wonder, right, that they start to lose that zest for life and that interest and that curiosity. And so it gets worse as they get older because then they start to pick up on things like, oh, I get in trouble when I ask too many questions, or I may look like a little bit silly if I don't know the answer. And again, these are all things that if you think about it, we've sort of turned into a negative thing when really like saying, I don't know, or having all these questions, it's our way of trying to pick up and understand and learn, right? And so again, a lot of the things that are very natural and organic, we kind of put them into this place that I would argue that goes against everything we know about kids and how they learn. And so, and I don't think that teachers are to blame, or like we were just talking at the beginning of this conversation, how they go in for the right reasons. But then there's just so much that goes on that suddenly we kind of forget why we're there in the first place, right? And so I think that that's one of the big issues. And then and the other one is that, every kid is good at something, right? Every kid has this like ability, but sometimes this thing is not necessarily an academic aptitude, right? And so it's not necessarily reinforced in school. And schools are so focused on remediating kids' weaknesses rather than doubling down on their strengths. And it would be very, very different if we had sort of learning experiences that focused on, okay, what are the kids already interested in? Let's sort of go ahead and start with that, right? Because you usually, when you're interested in something, you're willing to go all in. We don't need to force you to pay attention. We don't need to motivate you. You're already internally motivated, right? And that's sort of how things stick, right? Because usually when you're curious about something and you get to apply it right away, that's one of the best ways to actually remember the content and put it into practice. One of my biggest frustrations as a teacher was that I had all these students, right? And some were what would be considered the academic smart, right? That would excel in school. They would do really well. They would ace the tests. But then when we would do like an open-ended problem at the end of the unit that either came with the textbook or that I made up or something, where they actually got, because I was very interested in the practical application, because I'm very aware that knowledge decays really quickly, right? And if you don't get to apply what you learned in the next 14 days, it decays. And I was like, why are we spending time with, all this time with kids anyway? They're going to forget about it after the test. And so I would always have this like really cool end of the unit projects where they got to apply everything we learned. And it was very alarming to see how the kids that had aced the test, not all of them, but many of them, had no idea how to actually put this content into practice. And then you had kids who had not aced the test, who had actually done poorly on the test for several reasons, right? Either they're not good test takers or they had a bad morning that day, they didn't have a good night's sleep, several reasons. But they actually understood the concepts and they could apply it to the real world. And that's what matters. That's what I cared about. And so I started to see this big disconnect between sort of what we were doing in the classroom and then what was actually happening. And I started to notice the things that we had to do for kids to actually learn, right? And so again, one of them was to be able to apply things for them to see how they're going to apply right away. And you can't tell them like, you're learning this so that, maybe in the future, you may or may not use them. You lost them. Like if you tell them that, like it's gone, And so anything that's like practical application right away, which is why I'm a huge fan of project-based learning, which is very popular in homeschooling, and there's some project-based schools. But when kids get to actually learn from either a problem that you give them or a project where they get to see the connection between the different topics, right? And they see how the different subjects sort of like, synthesize with each other, and they get to apply things. And they're like, oh, I want to learn about this because I need it right now in order to go on to the next thing, then that's where true learning happens. And so that's one thing that I talk to lots of parents about. And I'm like, if you have your kids in school and you actually don't have the opportunity for them to engage in a lot of projects, then find projects outside of school where they can spend their time. And it has to be something that they pick, right? Something that they're interested in. and that they're willing to devote lots of time to and don't interrupt them, right? Because they don't get a lot of chance to do that in traditional schools. And I feel like that's what it takes to be great at something, right? When you are passionate about something and you spend lots and lots of hours and you're willing to work hard on that, like that's when the magic happens. And that's when real learning is happening, I would argue.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely and totally agree. Okay, but then there are parents listening right now, and I know what they're thinking. So I want to know what your take on this question would be because I get it all the time. What if my kid's not interested in anything? Or how do I even figure out what my kid's interested in? Because if I just let them follow their interests, they would just play video games all day long, or they
Yeah,
would just stare off into space, or my 8-year-old would just play Legos. Like, how do I
right.
even figure out what they're interested in?
Right. So I also get this question a lot, and there's a reason for that, by the way. If you see this very common for kids that have already been for a few years in the system or in this sort of like really structured adult-led environments, right? They kind of forget again all these things that come naturally, right? They forget how to figure things out for themselves because in school we give them so many instructions. They forget that they can figure things out, like that adult doesn't have to be telling you constantly what to do. They forget that they can actually like try something and fail at first because it's part of the learning process and then pick themselves up and try again. Like all these things they've been conditioned out of in school. So naturally, when you suddenly either pull them out of school or you try something different and you put them in this sort of like self-directed environments, they don't know what to do, right? Again, we've conditioned them to expect an adult to tell them how to do everything, what to learn, how everything. And so at the beginning, we need to be patient. And of course, at the beginning, they won't know. But what I've noticed is that if parents provide, it's not like you tell them, oh, you have the next 4 hours to do whatever you want, I'm leaving. No. At the beginning, you sort of have to walk them through how to do this and be around providing setting up the right kind of environment, right? Providing them access to the right kind of resources. At the beginning, you're going to have to help them brainstorm, what it is that they want to do and asking them, well, how can I help? Like, how can I introduce you to the right people that are going to help you, get this project done or what, together trying to figure this out. And again, it's something that won't happen in 1 day or 2 or 3. It may take weeks, right? But you kind of sort of like teach them again how to use their time wisely. And some parents are like, for that question, like, oh, my kid is not interested in anything. Like, no, your kid is interested in something. The problem is that sometimes it's not obvious. Right. And so again, sometimes they don't even know what they're interested in. And so you have to sort of pay attention to the things that they're naturally inclined to through conversations. What are the things? And sometimes, I talk to parents about this. Sometimes it's okay if it's something that you're not necessarily like into or used to, or, some parents are like, well, my kid is so obsessed with video games, but they're actually creating their own games and this and that. Why would I sort of like push them or into that? And I'm like, well, do you know that, the video game industry is a multi-million-dollar industry with lots of opportunities for different jobs and different things. And so if that's really what you think that your kid, is obsessed with and willing to spend time on and likes to build the games or likes to, do the game designer or God knows there's so many different things in this world, then, let them pursue that. And then maybe it's not going to take up all of their free time. You can, compromise and say like, okay, we're going to do this for a few hours and then we're going to engage in something outdoors, or you kind of like find that balance. But it's okay if it's not something that we necessarily like agree with, right? As long as it's something that they're willing and it's not dangerous, right? But that they're willing to spend time on, you kind of, you try to be part of that, right? And resist the urge of trying to like direct them. So it sounds easier than it is, of course, like put into practice. But I do think that it's something worth spending the time sort of conditioning them back into, right? And sometimes something that I found, like talking to different parents that have started this quest of finding what it is, they say that online communities are very helpful. Nowadays, there's like a bunch of different online communities that work on different projects or different things, or there's brainstorming. You meet kids from different countries. Because what I've noticed is that sometimes kids have a hard time finding kids that they connect with in their physical schools or maybe their neighborhood, but suddenly when they go online, they get inspired by all these different kids that speak different languages, that approach problems differently, that, and it's very valuable and sort of like gives them that motivation to then on their free time start to engage in the things that they want to. Does that make sense? And so
Absolutely.
I would encourage you, to sort of like find those online communities where they can actually connect with and be inspired by other kids that are doing things different.
Yeah, I love that. And the example, that we get all the time, and you just said too with the video games, I have a 10-year-old. My 10-year-old son, if he left to his own devices, he would play Minecraft or Roblox all the time. And so I've started telling him, and that's actually my goal for this year, to work with him
Mhm.
on the idea of creating more than he consumes.
Mhm.
So you can play video games, but You need to be doing something that is creative more often than you're consuming. So if you're just sitting there staring at the game, playing somebody else's game the whole time, that's not challenging your brain. Your brain's going to turn to
Mhm.
mush. But if you take some of what you're learning and you apply it and you go to MIT's free scratch, or you use some of the other, the books on basic coding or different things that we have, or you just try to apply that. He was playing with army guys and created a board game based off of it. And the board
Mhm.
game has cards that read very similarly to a lot of the video games that he's played. So I count that as a win. He's applying stuff and the adventures within the video game to a board game and has brought others into it to play with them. And so that's kind of the mantra that I encourage other parents to take, as you're working with your kids. If you can't, like, if you don't understand what it
Mhm.
is they're interested in, because I don't get video games. I'm just
Yep.
not a video game person,
Mhm.
never have
Mhm.
been.
Mhm.
Or you don't, it's something that you're not as excited about them being a
Mhm.
part of. Just focus on the idea that you want them to learn that it's more important to create than to consume. So as long as the balance is skewed more heavily towards
Mhm.
creation rather than consumption, it's a win.
Totally. I love that. I absolutely love that. I think I mentioned that on the book too as one of the tips. The other thing that I would pair that up with is, like you said, I'm also not a gamer, not at all. Like I've never played maybe a Nintendo a few times when I was young, but I was not really into it. However, now as an adult and as a, educator, I've become really interested in video games. Not that I'm like pushing kids to play video games, not at all. I just realized the amount of kids that play video games nowadays. And I was like, wow, let me approach this with curiosity rather than judgment. What is it about video games that intrigues kids so much? What can we learn about this? What are some of the things that video game designers are doing that we can actually grab and use at home or to design learning experiences for our kids that, draw their attention as much as they're to video games? So that's one thing, like approaching it with curiosity and trying to understand their gameplay. And even if you're not excited about it, pretend like you are. Be like, oh, you set the limits, right? You're like, okay, let's say you're going to play for an hour. The last 5 minutes, you sit down next to them and you're like, you pretend to be excited. You're like, well, show me what you're doing. Oh, explain this to me. Oh, that looks really cool. Oh, I see what you did. And just by doing that, it kind of eases the tension because usually kids associate video games with negative with their parents, right? Because we don't want for them to be spending so much time in front of screens. And so we usually, they see it as something like, oh, I can't talk to my parents about this. But if we kind of change that, you start to open up that space. And then it's a lot easier to find out what it is about video games or about what they're doing online that intrigues them so much. Like, what is it that they're seeking there that they're maybe not getting in the real world? And then it's your job as a parent to sort of pair that, is it the social component? Okay, what can I do to find, to fulfill this social need that he has outside, in the real world? Is it a soccer team or is it, is it the fact that he feels really, really good because he's, achieving things and going up levels and he gets to see very visually, how he's improving in something. We know that humans need to feel competent and a lot of kids don't feel competent in school, right? And so if that's it, then okay, well, what can I do? What do I know he's really good at in the real world? And how can I give him that opportunity so that he feels this sense of competency? And like that, you see little different things that actually you realize, well, again, I'm not going to incentivize my kid to play video games. However, if this is something that they're truly, truly into, we can set the right limits. He can fulfill that. And I can sort of find ways for him to, connect that to the real world and sort of find the practical applications of the things that they are learning in these video games and how to apply them to the real world.
Yeah, I love there's two things that you said in there that I absolutely adore. And I think that every parent listening needs to take that, approach it with curiosity, piece to
Mhm.
heart, because if you do that, everything else unlocks for you, right? If you approach the things that your kids are doing, you approach the things that your spouse is doing, anybody
Mhm.
around you is doing with curiosity, it not only opens things up for you, but that's great modeling for your kids. That's great parenting, which goes along with that second part, sitting down and asking them about what they're doing and engaging in conversation through the approach of curiosity
Mhm.
builds connections. And we know from dozens and hundreds and thousands of years of research, right, that the best relationships are formed through connection. And that's what we need with our kids, right? This world is crazy. There's so
Mhm.
many things going on. And if your kids feel strongly connected with the people who care most about them,
Mhm.
then they're going to grow into stronger, more confident, more able to think critically and
Mhm.
creatively um, adults who can make a difference in a positive way and not just fall into the fold of what everybody else around them saying. So Approaching things with curiosity and asking your kids about what it is they're
Mhm.
doing sets them up for success as an adult, and is really a small thing that we can
Mhm.
all do very without with very little effort.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Yep. I agree.
Okay, you have heard me talk for the last year and a half about CTC Math. The reason I keep talking about it is that they really are a fabulous choice for homeschool math. We are customers. I have been using CTC Math for several years. I pay for my own subscription and am an incredibly happy customer and consumer of the program. My youngest two use CTC, and it's perfect for both of their very different math experiences. One of my kids is a math go-getter and is a year ahead in math and prides himself on the fact that he can speed through it and do extra lessons to get ahead. We have all of the grade levels from kindergarten all the way to calculus at our fingertips, so he can progress as quickly as he wants to progress, and he loves it. My other one sometimes takes 2 or 3 tries at a lesson because some concepts click pretty quickly and some concepts don't. And she has the flexibility to approach math in any way she needs to. The best part too is the folks at CTC Math are so helpful. They want you to succeed. There was one time where we just could not understand what they were saying and how it was going and how it needed to be explained. And we watched a couple of videos on YouTube, and just as a last-ditch effort, I emailed the support team there and I said, look, I am having so much trouble explaining this to my kiddo. Can you just break it down for me in another way? And they did. They want you to be successful. In fact, CTC Math is so convinced they can help you and your kiddo be successful that they have a lifetime money-back guarantee. Like, what company does that? They want you to be satisfied. They want your kid to learn. That is incredible, and that is a company I want to support. So check them out at ctcmath.com or go over to the show notes for this episode and click on the link. Let them know I sent you. Ask them questions. They are there to support you. ctcmath.com. CTC is the best, filled with the best people. All right, let's get back to today's episode. Yeah. Okay. Tell me a little bit more. Tell listeners, because actually I read it. And so if you're looking at any video of this down the road, you'll see that my copy of Anna's book is like completely marked up.
I
And
love
if you're
that.
not, I'll put a picture like on Instagram when this
Yes.
airs. But her book's great. So tell us a little bit about the learning game.
Yeah. So, like I was saying at the beginning, I kind of started to reflect on the reasons why I was leaving the school system because something didn't feel right, but I couldn't quite put my finger to it, right? There were so many things. And so I felt this urge to start writing about it, even though I never considered myself a writer. I had never written anything, I don't think, in my life other than like lesson plans. And so I started writing all this down, and it all came down to this idea of, when kids enter the school system, they start to play what I call in the book the game of school, right? And the game of school is this universal thing where, and again, I'm talking about traditional schools, right? I'm very much aware that there are very different schools that are offering different kind of education, which is great. But for the most part, for traditional schools that came up, 200 years ago, and we're still sort of following this, the kids pick up on the things that they need to do in order to pass on to the next grade level, in order to not get in trouble, in order for their teacher to like them, right? How to get that participation grade, how many times I need to raise my hand, I need to sit up, be quiet, face forward, not talk, not ask anything that may get me in trouble. Like all these things you kind of pick up on, and then you end up being a good student if you follow these things, right? And you sort of pass on to the next level. So it's sort of like a game, but it's not necessarily a game that transfers to the real world, or that sort of like transforms into happiness, I would argue, right? And I started to notice that real, genuine learning would happen outside of school when kids were actually engaged in following their curiosities and exploring, and without this fear of being judged by adults or grades, or, that's where real learning was happening. And so I would call that, the game of learning, right? The learning game. And so I started to question a lot of the things that we did in order, we do in the school system, like, how can we go back to the things that we know about kids and how they learn and how their brains work? And how can we tap back into their motivations and the things that get them excited to learn so that they can become lifelong learners, which is the whole point of school, right? Like the idea of school should be for them to graduate knowing what they're really good at, how they want to contribute to the world, what they want to do next, which, by the way, may change, obviously, because we keep on changing and evolving, and knowing when that time to change is and how and what to do about it, how to make decisions for yourselves, how to understand trade-offs, how to handle failure, right? How to figure things out when there are no adults or no instructions or no lesson plans. Like, all these things are part of the game of learning that I argue that we're not really teaching kids in school, right? And that's the kind of thing that they're going to need in the real world, and this desire to keep on learning. And so I started to ask a lot of these questions, and it all came back to this idea of we've been following sort of this traditional way of learning for so many years without really questioning a lot of it, right? And so as a result, a lot of it has remained the same. If you look at other industries and how much they've been changing, yet education remains pretty much the same. There's a lot of reasons for it, but I started to say, well, is there a better way? And it turns out that there's a lot that parents can do starting at home, even if you cannot pull your kid outside of school, which happens to be the reality for most parents, and I'm very much aware of that. There's still a lot you can do at home in order to sort of complement and teach these soft skills that they're not necessarily learning in school, or to sort of save their confidence, right? Because a lot of kids really start to believe that they're not good and not smart because they tie, being smart to whatever happens in school. And as we know, with all this, like, school is one way to do things, right? And it works for some kids, right? But it happens to be the minority of kids. Like, and for those that works, that's great, right? But then what about all the other ones, right? That are not necessarily really benefiting from being in the system. There's a lot that can happen outside of school, little tweaks, little things that we can do. And then the other thing that I really started to notice that made me want to sort of write this book was when I would start to see those smart kids. And a lot of them were, the gifted kids, or the kids that would, and they would always consider, they've been told over and over again for years that they're very smart and that they're very good at what they do. And they're used as the example and this and that. And then suddenly these are the kids that were the most risk averse. God forbid they would try something that they could, that they had a feeling that maybe I'm not going to be good at first. I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to try that. And these were the most nervous kids, right? Like, they had all this anxiety, all this build up because they're scared to get things wrong and they scared to fail. And I started to realize, wow, in the real world, there's going to be so many times where things are not going to go their way, where failure, they're going to face adversity. They're not going to be the best all the time. They're not going to be the smartest kid in the room all the time. Like, how do we teach kids these skills and this, in a way that they can actually, benefit from this in the real world? And so a lot of my book focuses around that, around the idea of teaching kids how to fail constructively, sort of easing down all this idea of making mistakes, how to encourage them to ask questions again, and how that's not necessarily a bad thing if you do it appropriately, and how being a skeptic is actually good, right? Not believing everything that you hear. And so the book, is about how to teach kids how to sort of think for themselves, which again is something that they're born with and we train out of. How do we train them back into that? How do we help them unlearn a lot of this unhelpful lessons that they learn in school so that they can actually open up space to learn the things that are actually valuable in the real world? And how can we get them excited and empowered over their learning again? How can we give them back that autonomy and put them in the driver's seat, right? And remove all those speed bumps and see how far they can go. Because if there's one thing that I've learned from working with so many different kids in so many different places, is that kids are capable of doing so much more than we give them credit for, right? And they actually crave a challenge, unlike what, a lot of us have been conditioned to believe, right? And so it's about sort of like putting them again back into this like right environments, into the driver's seat, and sort of give them the resources and the tools for them to start conducting their own learning and become lifelong learners.
Yeah, I love that. And as I said, I've read the book. I love it. So definitely, if you are looking for ways to bring more autonomy in and help your kids kind of rediscover that idea of, trusting themselves as learners, definitely pick it up. And we'll link to it in the show notes. I love what you said in there about, helping them know that and trust that they can be autonomous learners, right? They don't need to be told what to do. I had a conversation recently with one of my teens because she does theater. So she joined a theater program in an all boys school recently because they recruit girls from neighboring districts in the general community. And it's a great program. It's a private prep boys school. They're very motivated learners and achievers. But she sees them, the girls who are part of the program, as well as the boys, doing homework and stressing about all the things that they have to do, after rehearsal and whatever. And she came to me asking like why she wasn't doing some of that and why, that telling me that I hadn't taught her all that she needed to know about history and, these dates and this and that, like her one friend was studying for a test. And I said, what do you want to learn? Like, what are you missing? Tell me about it. She's like, well, I don't know, these dates or this battle or whatever. And I said, okay, well, how would you find that information? And she told me. And I said, "Okay, well, then you know what you need to know. You
Mhm,
don't need to memorize the dates." I did that. I don't remember the
mhm,
dates
mhm,
for
mhm,
all the battles. I don't even remember the order of most of the battles, but if I
mhm,
needed to know it for a specific reason, I could find the information,
mhm,
and I'm comfortable enough telling somebody I don't know it, "Let me go
mhm,
figure it out and come back." That's what I want you to know. And, a 16-year-old girl, it reassures, and then it doesn't because nobody at 16 likes to be different
mhm.
completely. But I think that that's important. That's an important conversation too to have with our kids, right? Because they've been so conditioned, and even if they haven't been conditioned, this is a child who's never gone to school
Mhm,
and who has experienced learning through the lens of what do you want to know and why? And let's
mhm.
figure it out. They still will hit a point where they think that they're missing something the because society is so entrenched in that idea of you have to know this and this because I've decided you have to know this and
Mhm,
this.
mhm,
So it's important to keep that conversation going from the beginning that what do you want to know? Why?
mhm,
Then let's find out because I
mhm,
don't know the answer to it either. And if we
mhm.
can model that for our kids that we're learning as well, there's always something else to learn. I mean, just think about
Totally.
how much we can empower them.
So I absolutely love that you shared that. What a great example, because I think about this often, you know. What's so interesting about that is that she was curious about it. She was like, wait, I kind of want to learn about this. And it's like, great. And I'm sure that the kids at the other school that were forced to learn that were probably not that into it. They were like, why do I need to learn this and spend all this time outside of school, like doing the homework and this and that? But that's a great, it's like, do you want to learn? And showing them that they have the tools and the skill to teach themselves anything, which I think is the most powerful probably skill that any kid can develop, right? This ability of, hey, I have no idea what this is, but I have what it takes to figure it out. Like that attitude, it sounds very simple, but it's actually like we train it out of kids in school, right? Kids in
Yes.
school don't have that that confidence and, oh, I have no idea, but let me figure this out. And the second part of it that you said also very interesting, which is like acknowledging how you don't have all the answers. I think that one of the reasons why I had such a close relationship with my students and we got along so well was because from day one, I was very clear that I was not the fountain of wisdom. I did not have all the answers. I was here to teach and learn the same way that they were here to teach and learn, that, they could question everything. And, many times I was like, I have like no idea. Let's figure that out. Or you know what, you figure that out and you come back and teach them. And they would feel this sense of empowerment. And not only would improve like our connection and our relationship, but they would show themselves like, wait, I can, I can figure this out. And not necessarily because they're adults, they have all the answers, or not because they're adults, they are necessarily right. And this is also such an important thing that we need to teach kids, right? Especially in this crazy world that we live in, not to believe everything that they hear, right? Not only like, and the fact that they have what it takes to figure it out and that they can do their own research and ask their own questions. So that's such a great example.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We could probably talk for hours and hours and hours, but we have people who are like listening in between the dishes or the load of laundry that needs to be folded. So, if you were to like wrap this up with kind of one golden nugget or like one piece of advice or thought that you'd want to leave people with after this conversation, what would that be?
Wow. Okay. So I kind of touched upon this a little bit at the beginning, which is the power that parents have to influence their kids, right? So they're with us for about 18 years, right? And that's sort of the time that you have as a parent to do all that's in you to walk them in the right direction, right? And to sort of empower them and show them what they're capable of and build that confidence. And so I often talk about being the perfect enabler, right? And we talked a little bit about this, which is like, whatever your kid is, kids need to feel good and supported in something. So find what that is. A lot of the times teachers in school are not really doing this. They don't have the time. So you as a parent, find what your kid is obsessed with, really good at, and then help them become excellent at that. And again, that may change over time, but as long as they feel like they are really good at something and they're willing to work hard in it, then, that's incredible. But along the lines with that, and I talk about this in the book, this idea of, generalizing early in life and then specializing a little bit later. And so it's giving kids the opportunity to try different things without the expectation that everything has to stick, right? And so giving them the opportunity to quit the things that either they don't find fulfilling, or that, they want to open room to try something else, and not making them feel bad about it, right? Or attached, or making them feel like if they try something new, they have to stick to it. No, they can try different things. They can quit when it no longer feels appropriate. And you can make a list of principles, when this would be appropriate to quit. And then let them just try different things and observe them and sort of see what's the common thing that they keep coming back to. And then sort of that can be their specific knowledge, which is something else that I talk about in the book, and how to nurture that and how to help kids find sort of that unique combination of things that make them unique and make them, different in this world, and do everything you can to support that. Like, I feel like we as parents have forgotten how much we can do, even if we can't pull our kids from school. And it all starts by asking questions, not just going with the flow. And I think that people listening to this podcast are already on that track of asking questions. And so always approaching it through the lens of curiosity.
Okay, we will link to all of your social media and your website and the book. Highly encourage you, if you're listening, to grab a copy of Ana's book. But for listeners, if they're not, heading over to the show notes, do you want to just tell them where they can find you online?
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm MissFab_Learning Lab. On Twitter, I'm Ana Fábrega 11. And I have a newsletter called Fab Fridays on Substack. And you can go to my website, afabrega.com, and find The Learning Game anywhere where you find books online. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Thrift Books, wherever.
Perfect. And like I said, we'll link to all of that. Thank you so much, Ana, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I love this conversation.